Well, fortunately, right now for us, classic hits music is doing quite well right across North America. So we're kind of in a golden period. I don't exactly know the secret formula why, but I have a few thoughts. Vinyl has made a comeback, and I'm thinking, a lot of kids. You go to the Value Village, the Goodwill stores, the secondhand stores, and you'll see younger generations picking out the vinyl. And I've actually been in a spot where I'm kind of like, is he going to take that thing? I hope not. But I think it's because they're rediscovering all of the greatness that came with listening and sitting back and experiencing vinyl, and in the same process, discovering how awesome it was. So I think that's had a little bit to do with it. I think commercial advertisement, again, is responsible for the resurgence of it. A lot of 80s movies, Hot Tub Time Machine, just to throw reference to that, they go back to the 80s. And I think it's and the other thing is the sampling that a lot of the new music does also channels the 80s music. So people are hearing these things, Glee, for example. They're watching the show, and then the parents are going, no, that's not a new song. That's an old song, as a matter of fact. And then the parents would, let the kids experience that music in its original state. And with any luck, the kids are going, wow, this really is good. Glee isn't on the air anymore, but we're still playing the music that they featured in the show. So I think there's a few factors that are making it cool again. Everything, makes its circles, makes its comebacks. And right now, 80s and 70s, 80s, 90s music is doing that for at least Boom 97.3 in Toronto. So thank goodness. For the most part, the 80s music, a lot of people wanted to try something new, be different, hence some of the freaky hairdos that you'd see, hair bands, you name it, different clothes, wild. Everybody wanted to stand out and be absolutely different. Ziggy Stardust, for example, I know that's 70s, but you had to find that niche to try and be different, to make sure you make an impression. MTV was big as well, because that gave bands a venue to say, this is who we are, check us out, let's be wild, let's be crazy. A lot of the time, people just shot shit that had nothing to do with the video whatsoever, but they just wanted to be outlandish and memorable. And yeah, MTV certainly survived for a little while, but then, like most things, they evolved. So it was a lot of, let's be different, let's stand out, let's see what we can do that nobody else has done before, and make it our own. In our station format, we have 70s, 80s, 90s. We play artists from the 90s that are similar to some of the sounds from the 70s and 80s. Oasis, for example, Nirvana. They've got that rootsy kind of vibe, that feel, that freedom, that energy, that talent, the songwriting process. So I think, yes, it's just a matter of the listener evolving, You've got somebody that grew up listening to 70s music. They're getting older, but, hey, I still like those guys.
How did Tom Scholz record More Than a Feeling?
A great example of a studio album, and one that changed the music industry, was Boston and More Than a Feeling. And it's one guy in a studio layering and layering and layering. I think there's 7 guitars that he's got on the album, and then and the drums and all of that nonsense. But it sounds fantastic. And it was that album that made other groups like Foreigner, like Journey, go, holy shit, look what this guy can do. We got to do that. It was kind of he created a new formula. But it was just one guy in a studio doing it the old school way. Lost are the days where you get a bunch of people in a studio, in a house, or wherever the place may be, that are recording an album. It was a community sort of vibe. You'd be locked in this place for days trying to pump out some stuff. As frustrating as it is that I hear from artists when they talk about that, it's also kind of a lost art now, in that you can just record your little bit, leave, and that stuff's saved on a hard drive somewhere. So, it's handy in an editing kind of way. You don't have to, live there for a month or 2 months or however long it takes. You can just record your piece and then scoot. So, I think the computer technology is good, and it's also kind of takes away from the whole experience, that whole lost roots of creating an album, a classic album. I think there's a big positive to the internet. It's exposure. It's like free marketing. Somebody wants to know
hey, what was that song by The Who? Or what was that song by Led Zeppelin that I heard on that TV show? You go to the internet and you look up the episode, you find out what the soundtrack was, or so on and so forth, or movie soundtracks. So it opens up a whole new era, of potential buyers. And with the amount of commercials that are using songs that we're familiar with, I've, Lord knows how many times I've said, where have I heard that song before? There it is. Oh, it's those guys, chorus. So it's a great marketing tool if you're a band of any genre.
Could a band exist today that was like Guns N' Roses and Aerosmith? I think so. I think what a band should do would be to study the classics, to study what these bands did and how they pulled it off, on stage as well as outside of the stage. What were their quirks? What did they do to essentially piss off the media or give the fans, have them wanting more? I think if a band, obviously they have to be talented musicians, they got to write, they got to produce, they got to own all their stuff. And then if they can study the classic rockers and the ones that they really, really look up to, I think, they could possibly pull it off. But there's so many different factors now today. You've got social media, you've got obviously different styles of radio stations coming up rather than your regular AM and FMs. You've got your online radio stations now, so they need to find a way. There's a lot of studying. They would take every ounce of that media exposure and use it to their advantage and create something mythical, if you will. So I think they could. It's just a matter of who's it going to be and when's it going to happen.
Do you think that there could be another Led Zeppelin for the new generation? What would they have to do?
I think there is. That's tough. That's a tough question, though. Led Zeppelin was Jimmy Page's brainchild. Here's this session player who, was kicking ass and everybody was bringing him in. And he said, I'm tired of doing what everybody else wants to do. I want to do what I want to do. So you need somebody that's going to, have that genesis of a thought and go, what, let's make a kick-ass. Let's do some research. Let's figure out what made these guys successful, or what did these guys. You can take all these different elements of different successful rock bands, and of course passion is a huge part of that, and talent, and timing. So if you can market yourself and get enough people and passion and support, then I think totally you could do it. There isn't really any good super groups that are still around, with the exception maybe of U2, Rolling Stones obviously, but they're getting older. So, who is going to be that super group? Classic rock has so many different influences on it. It's got the country vibe, Lynyrd Skynyrd. It's got the bluesy vibe, Led Zeppelin. It's got the hard rock kind of punky feel, which is The Who. So it's got so many different elements in it.
As programmers, we've been dealing with this problem where if we follow classic rock with the baby boomers to death, we will lose the younger end. So in order to attract the younger end, we need to include at least a portion of the 90s to keep them interested. Because if we attract the younger end with the honey of grunge, they're going to rediscover these unbelievable artists that provided the bedrock for grunge. So, I think we have to sort of widen the scope of classic rock in an effort to attract a broader audience, to keep the format relevant for years to come. Classic rock is the soundtrack of your youth. And to define it by era, I think, is difficult, because as time continues, even with the advent of grunge in the 90s, it was fed by the quality of the music of the 70s. The 70s was the core of classic rock, no question, from 68 to 79. And I'm a massive fan of bands dating back to the starting with the Beatles, obviously, right through to the grunge period. I think without classic rock you wouldn't have had grunge. So I think to start to include grunge in the classic rock vault is important. you know, everything in this day and age is created on a keyboard and a drum machine, and the vocals are treated beyond belief in Pro Tools, and these guys from the 70s were all quality musicians. You did not have success unless you were a player, and I think the art of musicianship is being lost in today's music, and so do I hope we return to a guitar-based drums, vocals, musical society? I sure as hell hope so, yes. My personality is shaped by the music of that time. And you know, everybody goes through sort of a phase. They discover it in phases. I started, you know, listening to Led Zeppelin and the Doors, and then I moved into the sort of the folkier stuff and the Crosby, Stills and Nash and the Neil Young, and so there's so much meat to it that it's so impossible to describe it as one possible thing. I think classic rock will stand the test of time because the albums of that age, people listen to the entire product. And when they were creating the music, they spent an incredible amount of time creating them. And I don't think that the same sort of effort is put into creating an album of work as happened back in the day. I think you know, these bands, the Led Zeppelins, the Doors, the Eagles, the Beatles, created bodies of work in their entirety. Now it's a singles-based mentality, and I just don't think it's going to stand up to the classic rock of the 70s. It's actually interesting, even in radio ratings, we find that there's a sort of a classic rock saddle, we call it, from ages sort of 25 to 44, where people sort of lose interest in it. But 18 to 25, we find the kids are discovering for the first time, and they're getting charged up by the Zeppelins, the Doors, the Eagles, etc. And so, without including grunge, we're not going to have the honey to attract the younger bees.
So there are a lot of classic rock stations, both in Canada and the U.S., that have been recently rebranding. What do you think is the current condition of classic rock?
I think it's still healthy. You know, a year ago May, when Q107 made that change and they started playing in the 90s and 2000s, stuff like that, a lot of people sort of freaked out. And there was a Canadian Music Week, it's a conference they do every year here. And in May, Fred Jacobs was here, and Fred's like one of the pioneers of classic rock. And I asked him, I said, do you think classic rock is dead? Is this like Q107's made this move? Why would they do something like that? This is their format. And he says, you know, it maybe has run its course. So then a year later, this year, I asked Fred Jacobs the same question. And he says, no, classic rock's fine. I think there was maybe that time period, a year or so ago, then people started going, okay, is it dead, is it over? But like everything, it evolves. How far do you want to evolve? You know, I still think that, you know, a true classic rock can do well. You know, I guess you go back to the Psychedelic Sundays that Q107 does, it 65 to 75. And that was sort of that time period that, to me, that's where the real classic rock, you know, that's where, you know, the Led Zeppelins, you know, the Pink Floyds, Rolling Stones, Beatles, you know, you got to play the Black Dog and stuff like that, but you got to play the Ramble On too. You know, you got to go find those album tracks that everybody knows, because, you know, if you bought those Zeppelin records, you know every song on the album. So, you know, you don't have to play the hits. You can play the, you know, spice in those great album tracks, because there's so many. And that the great thing about the classic rock format is that everybody knew all those songs. It's not like, you know, you knew the singles, you knew the albums. So you could dip into all those great album tracks, and that's what, to me, what gives the format that, you know, you need that little extra spice, that one, oh wow, I haven't heard that one for a while. You need those. Back in the 80s, I guess, when, you know, Bon Jovi and Def Leppard and stuff like that, you know, they're good rock bands, but and they're sort of considered classic rock now, but there's no way that they, to me, rival a Led Zeppelin or Pink Floyd or, you know, Rolling Stones, that kind of band. You know, they were a whole other type of rock. And then, you know, one of the closest, I guess, ever for me was like Pearl Jam. Pearl Jam was a band that seemed to really get the, you know, the double guitars, lead vocal, bass drums, and just, you know, rock off a solo whenever they wanted. It was like, okay, that goes back to the 60s, like they could do it. But there's very few bands that, to me, have sort of done that. that have that real classic sound and sort of sound today too.
What do you enjoy about classic rock music?
To me, again, it was that time period where, I was like 15 in 1970. So, when you're 15, 16, you're in high school and music's one of your main things. You grew up with those albums and, all of a sudden, Who's Next comes out or Led Zeppelin 4 comes out, and you run down Sam the Record Man and you pick it up and you take it home and you got all your buddies. And I remember when I first heard Zeppelin 4 was a neighbor who said, I just got it. And there was like 3 or 4 of us. So I'll go down his basement. He's got a pool table. We're shooting pool, listening to Zeppelin 4. And I still remember when Bonham did rock and roll, and it's like, oh, another drum solo. It's like the excitement of when those records came out was amazing. Here at Boom, we do Turntable Tuesdays. We play a bunch of vinyl every Tuesday, and we're out checking the lawn sales and stuff like that, picking up the old ones, and it really is. I'm back. I'm buying all my favorite vinyl now. I just got like the Allman Brothers Live at the Fillmore East. There's like a 4-record set for like $100. It's one of my favorite albums of all time. And I didn't care if it was $100. I wanted it. And I think people are doing that again. It's like, and the quality of the vinyl is so much better now. And it just sounds really good. So I think, yeah, definitely people are going back. And especially those albums that you grew up with. And everyone's got those ones that, they maybe didn't mean that much to anybody else, but to you, it was one of those records you have to have.
Hey, thanks for watching. My name is Daniel Sarkisian. I'm an independent filmmaker from Toronto.